Hello everyone, Max here with Fiction Rant, bringing you part 5 of my series discussing the Star Trek versus Star Wars debate. This part will focus on the available numbers of ships and soldiers in each universe. I'll reiterate that this is the Star Trek Federation as of the Dominion War versus the Galactic Empire as of Return of the Jedi. I'll tackle ground forces first, since this time it'll be a lot simpler. The Star Trek Federation doesn't really do armies. They have a significant fleet presence with security personnel, but mass ground battles aren't really a thing in the Star Trek universe. So, to my knowledge, there's never really been a Federation ground conflict that involved more than a few dozen combatants, aside from if a colony is being sacked or something like that. But that's not really an army battle, that's an army raiding a colony. I think that really they have more of the mentality that larger conflicts can be resolved by ships in orbit. After all, a single Federation starship could absolutely devastate the surface of any planet using a combination of phaser and torpedo fire, so amassing a huge army would just be impractical. The Star Wars Empire, on the other hand, has a massive standing army of stormtroopers and armored transports. Each Imperial 1 Star Destroyer has a standard garrison of 20 AT-AT walkers, 30 AT-ST walkers, and almost 10,000 stormtroopers. That's in addition to any ship crew that has to run the vessel. Presumably, this massive army has something to do with trying to actually conquer planets instead of just blowing up their enemies, especially because their weaponry is not that precise, so they just kind of blanket an area with turbo laser fire if they want to actually shoot things from orbit. But really, when it comes down to it, I think the logic behind this is more just that it looks really cool on screen, and you get to see awesome Jedi and Sith using lightsabers. So, that's the armies, on to the ships. Here's the portion of this discussion that prompted me setting everything in Dominion War era for Star Trek and Return of the Jedi for Star Wars. For both sides, this is really the pinnacle of strength we actually get to see and have any on-screen evidence about. Sure, there's the First Order in the sequel trilogy, but how powerful they are is really awkward to figure out, and a dreadnought was taken out by one X-Wing and the bombs from one bomber. Compared to Return of the Jedi, where the Executor was destroyed by crashing it into the surface of the Death Star 2, following concentrated fire of the entire Rebel fleet, and the crashing of an unlucky A-Wing pilot right into the bridge right after their bridge shields had been disabled. That caused their attitude control to be disabled for just a few seconds before somebody could reassert control, and it crashed into the Death Star. Meanwhile, it was under strict orders to not return fire. The First Order sucks. I'm sure that the supplemental materials have some very well-worded explanations for why the First Order Dreadnought was actually a vast improvement over the Super Star Destroyer Executor, but I really don't buy it. Alright, mini rant over. At the times I've selected, the Empire had an absurdly large fleet spread across the galaxy, enforcing Emperor Palpatine's harsh rule. This consisted of millions of vessels, including 25,000 Star Destroyers of various types, 50 Super Star Destroyers, and the Death Star. The Imperial 1 Star Destroyer I've been referencing during this series is a good representative of those 25,000 Star Destroyers, so they're both heavily armed and have limited fighter carrier capacity. Depending on the particular vessel you're talking about, the capabilities would vary, of course, but I'll stick with the Imperial 1 for simplicity. Each of those beasties carried a standard complement of 48 TIE fighters, 12 TIE bombers, and 12 TIE interceptors. This means that at the Battle of Endor, the largest engagement we ever get to see in the original trilogy, which involved 30 Star Destroyers and a Super Star Destroyer, various support vessels, and the Death Star 2, there were literally thousands of fighters and bombers engaging the rebels. As for Star Trek, at the time of the Dominion War, I'll defer to the article called Size of Starfleet that I'll link below, since no overall number is actually ever given, and figuring out how many ships they actually had is pretty much impossible. But according to the estimates on the site, anything between 10,000 and 70,000 ships is reasonable. The largest deployment of Federation ships I could find in Deep Space Nine episode Favor the Bold, where Ben Sisko led a fleet of 627 ships to try to stop the Dominion from receiving 2,500 ships through the Bajoran wormhole. If you're a Star Wars fan and have no idea what I'm talking about, watch the episode. It's in Season 6 and it's epic. In any case, the important part here is that the Federation was able to wrangle a fleet of 627 ships to fight in a single battle. Unlike the Empire, though, the Federation doesn't really use fighters or bombers, with the closest equivalent being shuttlecraft of various classes, but in any case, they would not be nearly as numerous as the fighters that the Empire utilized. It's not clear, but the implication of the episode is that most, if not all, of those 627 vessels were capital class ships, so the shuttlecraft would not be counted in that total. This is why raw numbers in this case are very misleading. If you have 1,000 guys in rubber dinghies versus my one ship, but my one ship is a fully equipped aircraft carrier, pretty sure I still win. For the purposes of this debate, I'll be pitting the same number of capital ships against each other, not including shuttles and fighters, since the staggering numbers of ships available to both sides are just impossible to manage. Granted, this means that in terms of total vessels, the Empire will outnumber the Federation by about 50 to 1, once you count the fighters and bombers. But that's an advantage I really can't take away from them, since the fighters and bombers are such a huge part of how the Empire's fleet operates, and I'm still trying to keep the debate as even-handed as possible. I'll explain further in my conclusions section, but a larger factor in my opinion is how many vessels can actually be practically mustered at a given location and time, and the availability of reinforcements. But these factors depend on how fast they can traverse the galaxy, which is the subject of part 2 of this series, which I've already covered. So, how will this impact the overall matchup? Well, you'll just have to check out the rest of the series to see what I think about that question, but in the meantime, what do you think of all this? Did I skip over something I shouldn't have? Are my numbers and conclusions totally wrong? Please comment below, and until next time, live long and prosper, and may the Force be with you.